Welcome to the conversation on TYT Network. So I'm given to understand that Nancy Pelosi is a master legislator. And that's why in the 9 elections that she has led, the Democratic Party has won all 9 of them and have picked up hundreds of seats in the House. Oh, wait, I'm getting breaking news. That did not happen. We're gonna tell you her actual win to loss ratio in a second. But in her loss column is this election, where they were supposed to pick up 20 seats and picked up instead 0. In fact, they lost, right now it stands at around 10 or so. So in dealing with this enormous failure, of course, there is talk that progressives should be blamed and leadership has no fault at all. So we're gonna bring in Alex Salmon here. He is a writer for the American Prospect and he's gonna break this down for us. So Alex, in the 9 elections, what's Pelosi's record?
Pelosi is sporting a 5 for 9 record, so she's got 5 net wins and 4 net losses. But that even skews a little favorably for what her actual breakdown is, and we've seen her preside over 2 wipeout losses, and those have actually come in more recent years. And the big victories that she's been a part of have pretty much come when Republicans have done such a bad job that they basically lose all traction with the electorate. So that's what we saw in 2006 and 2008, and then again in 2018. So it's certainly not the sort of resume that would make her untouchable as a political strategist.
Yeah, in 2006, the Iraq War was an absolute debacle, and in 2008, the economy crashed worse than it has ever crashed in our lifetimes until 2020. And even with Trump being the debacle that he was in 2018, so for those 3 elections, all you do was stand still and do absolutely nothing, and you would have picked up dozens and dozens of seats. And that actually should have been the case in 2020 as well. We couldn't even do that. We couldn't even do that in 2020. We lost seats. I can't believe that the Democrats lost seats in the House in 2020. So Alex, Clarion called, and I imagine in Washington, to get rid of Democratic leadership. Chuck Schumer too, I mean, he couldn't pick up 3 simple seats in the Senate when we have the worst president in United States history. So everybody in Washington is talking about getting rid of leadership, right?
Well, you would think so. You would think there might be a little bit of accountability in the air, but that certainly has not seemed to be the case. And so far, Chuck Schumer was reappointed to his position, basically with no objection from Senate Democrats, and we're now well on our way to seeing all of House leadership reappointed as well.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. That vote's coming on Wednesday. So Speaker Pelosi blowing this election, as she has many in the past, as we talked about, and their strategy was, let's go conservative. Let's go as moderate or as conservative as we can. Cheri Bustos, a massive conservative they put in charge of the DCCC, as I can personally attest to, but as we can see in dozens and dozens of races across the country, the Democratic Party always picked the more conservative option and actively fought against the more progressive option. In fact, would blacklist anyone. Said if you ever work with progressives, we'll is in terms against an incumbent challenger, will ruin your careers forever. So that conservative strategy clearly didn't work out. So I imagine then there is a progressive uprising against Nancy Pelosi, and the right wing in the Democratic Party has been chastened, right?
Again, yeah, you might think so, but I think progressives got caught on the back foot a little bit on this one. Most people would say if moderates and conservatives come up with the strategy, if they hold all the leadership positions, if they're making all the decisions, they would be to blame for the losses of their fellow moderates. But of course, actually, the moderate wing came out and said it's progressives' fault that moderates lost these elections. It's progressives' fault that we chose this strategy that they had no power and influence in deciding upon. And so far, all we've heard, all I've heard insofar far as moderate positions has been Hakeem Jeffries, who himself is a fairly right-wing Democrat, all things considered, mounting a challenge to Nancy Pelosi, who is very much in the same narrow ideological position on that spectrum. And progressives are looking to be shut out yet again of any meaningful leadership position. So it's a surprising development, I think, for anyone who watched this election and saw these results to think that business as usual is going to be the thing we're probably going to go with again.
Yeah, Alex, I wish it were surprising, of course. Unfortunately, with the state of Washington, it's not at all surprising. So one thing I'd like to thank the conservative Democrats for admitting accidentally is where Hakeem Jeffries actually stands. So every once in a while, he and other conservative Democrats will pretend to be progressive, and then they'll hide behind identity politics. They'll hide behind whatever they can. They usually hide behind corporations. But here they've accidentally admitted Hakeem Jeffries would be a right-wing challenger to Nancy Pelosi. And if you follow politics at all, you'll know that that's of course true, because Hakeem Jeffries is the biggest progressive basher in the House. He's the guy they send out to try to malign, harass, and try to beat progressive challengers, or really any progressives. So the only challenge to Nancy Pelosi will be from the right wing of the Democratic Party and not from the left wing. So now, look, our audience helped to get a lot of those progressives elected, but now I'm starting to get fed up a little bit. So, I did a quizzical thing where I, on social media asked Rashida Tlaib to run, hashtag run Rashida run. Look, there are different ways to do things and to create pressure campaigns. It was kind of like a last-ditch effort of like, somebody's got to say something, right? But it doesn't look like any progressives are ever going to challenge Pelosi. I find that stunning. So I'm criticizing my own side here. So what are they waiting for? Are they waiting for an invitation? Is Pelosi going to give them one? Are they ever going to get permission to challenge Pelosi in Washington? So do you have a sense of what's going on in the progressive wing?
Yeah, well, it's interesting too, because given all those losses, those wipeout losses from moderates, progressives didn't lose any elections in 2 weeks ago. So they've grown their ranks. They're certainly a larger percentage of the Democratic caucus than they were before. So you'd think that they would have a little more power and a little more courage going into this. I think what's holding them back right now is that 2022, every indication is not going to be a very favorable cycle. And so we have redistricting coming up. Often that first midterm election is unfavorable for the party of the president. And so I think a lot of progressives are afraid to even touch that speaker position or the DCCC chair for that matter, because in all likelihood, Democrats are going to sustain some pretty serious losses in the next election cycle. And I don't know if I think that's a great excuse, and I think it's worth debating, but that's kind of where some of the timidity is coming from is if you look into the future, it's not looking so great. And I don't think progressives who are already being blamed for the current losses that they had nothing to do with don't want to step up to take responsibility for the future losses that may be on the way.
Yeah, no, that's cowardice. So here, I'll do it. You give it to me, we won't lose, okay? So obviously it's rhetorical, but my point is, if you fight and make your case, yes, Democrats, isn't this amazing? Look at this amazing conversation. I'm about to tell the Democrats, you actually can win elections if you make your case. And right now in Washington, they're like, oh, there's no way, man. You're crazy. Already we're surrendering 2022. Isn't that amazing? Oh, they're the worst. They're the worst. So go fight. If you don't fight, you're never going to win. And now, again, I'll turn to the progressives. Listen to Frederick Douglass. Power never concedes anything without a fight. They're not going to voluntarily give up their power. If you want that on behalf of your voters, you have to fight for it. If you're not willing to fight Nancy Pelosi and Hakeem Jeffries and Sherry Bustos, then maybe we picked the wrong people. So let's go, whatever you want to call it, grow some courage and fight. Now look, last thing here, Alex, I gotta ask you about, speaking of Sherry Bustos and speaking of the DCCC, for the folks at home, that's the DCCC is the one that runs the House races. So if anyone was at fault here, the primary culprit, of course, is Bustos. But it's not just about her, it's about the philosophy. So yes, all the progressives won and we picked up seats. And we did much better than the moderates did. For example, Kara Eastman lost by 4, but in Nebraska, but Max Rose in New York, a very conservative Democrat, lost by 16, right? But even in a purple district, as you point out in your piece, Katie Porter grew her lead, very progressive, and did better and won easily, right? Sherry Bustos, in a similar purple district in a different state, and she's a very conservative Democrat. She ran the conservative Democratic strategy. She was ahead of it. So she must have won by even more than Katie Porter, right?
Yeah, it's funny. She eked out one of the most narrow victories I think you could hang on to, and it only actually happened because a few days before the election, she sounded the alarm, and the House Majority PAC, which is run by Robbie Mook of Clinton 2016 fame, who's very much another one of these moderate Democrats. They came through with $1 million ad buy in the last minute there, and they really saved her skin. So she was very lucky to survive. And meanwhile, yeah, Katie Porter in a similar district, Orange County actually saw what was really a red wave where a lot of Democrats did much worse than we expected. And she won by a considerable margin. And it shows you, it really shows you that there are ways to win if you make it about issues, if you do your job, if you exhibit just a degree of competence, and that maybe bashing progressives isn't the best sales pitch when it comes to winning these elections.
Because you know what you're doing? You're bashing your own base. What a preposterously dumb idea. Who in the world could possibly think that that's a good idea? Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Sherry Bustos. And by the way, did you notice the lead that we just buried there? The guy who ran the House campaigns was Robbie Mook, the guy who ran Hillary Clinton's campaign. Why? Why on God's green earth would you hire that proven loser who lost to Donald Trump to run your campaigns? It's unbelievable. Now I get it, it's a PAC, and the donors were the suckers who gave that clown money. And what did they do? Oh, look at that, they gave all the money to conservative Democrats who barely won some elections and lost the rest. Money flushed down the toilet again on Robbie Mook and Pelosi and Schumer. But Washington is never, ever, ever going to learn a lesson. And by the way, if we don't fight, we can't even make an issue out of it. Everybody, Alex, super last thing, we're over time, but in Washington, this conversation we're having is not happening, right? I mean, there's no one who's saying like, oh, I can't believe that the progressives are not challenging Pelosi. In fact, if they did, almost every reporter in town would be outraged, wouldn't they?
It's it is interesting, and it's one of these things where I think a lot of people are hoping that Pelosi has said in the past this will be her last term as Speaker. She's 80 years old, and a lot of Democratic leadership, the big three are all octogenarians. Jim Clyburn is in his 80s, Steny Hoyer is in his 80s, and Nancy Pelosi is in her 80s. And I think a lot of people are willing to wait this out. And I'm not sure that's the best way to go about things. I'm not sure that we should assume that they're just going to step aside just because they're old. And I think you're right. I think that this is there's going to have to be some sort of confrontation here where progressives make a play for power. And if not, they're just going to be relegated to the sidelines yet again. And I'm surprised how little of that conversation is happening. And I think you put it exactly right.
All right, Washington, frustrating as always. Everybody check out Alex's piece in the American Prospect. Obviously, he's got excellent information in there. Alex, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.